If, of course, you find that you are stuck in that pattern where it is consistently happening and where you are having to always work through those emotional charges, you're, doing your white flag exercise, for example, every single day, then that's also an indicator that you've got a much deeper cycle playing out. Okay, and this is something that I very vaguely touched on at the beginning of the week, but it is a really important thing for you to be aware of, and that is your emotional charges. So, you know how I was saying your limbic system is really big, it's charged with memory, and it fires off all of your emotions, right? So, when your emotions, let's say you get guilty, mama guilt, something happens, you lose your shit, and you end up with mama guilt. And then the kids go off to their work day or their school day or whatever it might be. And then you start to replay, oh God, if only I had done this differently. I wish I could have done that differently. And you start to beat yourself up with the whole shouldas, right? That charges your guilt. Now, when guilt in this example is fired off, your unconscious mind goes, oops, she's feeling guilty again. So let me just remind her of all of the times that she feels guilty, because your unconscious mind doesn't know the difference between positive and negative. It doesn't know the difference between good and bad. It just knows she's feeling this. She must want to feel like this because she's feeling it. So let's show her all the reasons why she feels this way. So it charges the feeling with your memories. Oh God, and that reminds me of when I did this to my kids, and I've been such a bad mum. And then you find, 3 hours later, you're still dwelling in how bad of a mum you are, when in fact it was 30 seconds. Logically, you know it. Emotionally, you can't break that feeling. Now, what's really interesting for us, largely as women, it does happen for men as well, though, is that they've now proven that we also inherit many generations of emotional baggage. From a historic perspective, we as women, the gender of women, have been oppressed, repressed, and suppressed for centuries. And we have been told for centuries that we're not good enough. When and I'm just going to throw some examples off here to you to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. But back in the day when women birthed girls, they were made to feel ashamed and bad and guilty because girls were seen as the weaker sex. Men, little boys, they were the one that were going to carry forward the family name, right? So when a lady gave birth to a girl, she was made to feel bad for it. You know, the one that I'm thinking about is King Henry VIII, because he had a little girl in Elizabeth from his first wife, and the first wife was literally put through hell because she couldn't birth a boy, because it was the birthing of a son that would, make King Henry the big man that he was supposed to be. That guilt that those women felt are women in your family line, and it has been passed on generation after generation after generation. We have been made to believe, historically through societal conditioning, that we are weaker, that we have things to be guilty for. If you're emotional, you're made to feel guilty because it's a weak thing to show emotion. If you've got PMS, oh God, it's that time of the month again. You're made to feel guilty and ashamed because you're emotional. You're doing something that you can't even control because it's part of your female body, and yet we are made to feel a certain way about it. So when you feel guilty because you've not done something for your kids, yes, you're carrying that guilt from that moment, which is most often irrational as well. But the reason that it's irrational is because it has been fed by every example where you've let someone down. So that's your lived in memory of the shouldas that are playing out in today's moment of guilt. Plus, you're carrying at least 14 generations, that is around 300 years of historic baggage that have been passed on to you from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. And this is why our emotions so often feel irrational. This is why our emotions so often we can't get our head around. And if you're anything like me, I was always a really positive and confident person. And then I had my kids, and the hormonal shifts that took place in my body because of my pregnancies were enough to trigger a lot of those deeply embedded and rooted emotional problems. So I became a different person after my kids. And you've probably said the same thing to yourself. Back in the day before I had kids, I was like this, and then something happened. It was like this switch just went off, and I became this different person. Pregnancies do it, hormonal fluctuations do it, perimenopause does it, which is again why I'm so passionate about this particular group of women who are in our late mid to late 40s and beyond. Our kids are doing the next thing, so they're going into a next phase of our life. We've got all of our own hormonal shift and shit taking place, which can trigger new emotional baggage to surface up, to be triggered and turned on from the conditioning of past generations. Even events like traumatic events, if you've ever had an event that has shocked you, can be enough to turn on all of those emotions that have been under the surface, but they've been in control. Does this all make sense? I hope it makes sense, because what it did for me was provide me with the acceptance that, number one, I'm not fucked up. I'm just hormonal. I'm female, and I'm carrying a hell of a lot more than just my own lived in experiences. So while it's important to acknowledge your lived in experiences and know that, yes, they need addressing, and yes, you could do things differently, the lived in experience is only part of the problem. And this is why I'm a massive, massive believer in not asking why you feel what you feel or why you think it's happened to you. Because in all honesty, you don't know. We don't know why we feel unexplainable guilt when we also know that we're good mums. We don't know why we lose our shit over the smallest of things and why our fuse is really short when back in the day we had the patience of a saint. We don't know why we feel what we feel. It doesn't matter why we feel what we feel. What matters is what are we going to do with it? And that is the overarching message that I've always had, is to focus less on why you feel what you feel and more on what you can do with it. And it starts by acknowledging what it is that you're actually feeling it, accepting it, and then doing something to neutralize it so that you can then step forward. Of course, there's bigger and even more profound things that you can do so that you don't have to consciously remind yourself to do all of those things. But for where you are right now and for what you're needing as a mum who is just doing her best, these in the moment strategies that can temporarily reduce the charge are game savers. And as a caveat to all of that, knowing what we know about the inherited shit that we have brought forward from generations before us, these tools are tools that you can also teach your children. And by you addressing your emotional charge and encouraging them to do the same, we're also stopping that inherited shit from being passed on to our future generations. If we've already got children, which we all do in this group, we're already mums, we can influence our children positively by taking ownership of our emotional status and doing something with it, because we can role model to them that we don't need to let circumstances dictate how we feel and we don't need to stay stuck in shit. That's how we can influence the next generation. But if we can influence the next generation to also take responsibility of their own emotional state and to take, I suppose the word's ownership, to break the cycle. If you can break the cycles and you can encourage the next generation, your daughters, to break the cycles, then we start to break cycles for our grandchildren and future generations. And that is how we're ultimately going to empower the women of the planet.